I'm here with Sarah Snow, who is an ISFP Enneagram 3, which it's interesting because it's like, oh, it's not necessarily the most common type combination by any means, but there are a lot of like famous ISFP 3s, I think, throughout history. Because it's like the drive to be famous is very 3 in general.
Yeah.
And then the drive to express yourself through art is very ISFP.
Yeah.
So when you put those things together, you get like Lady Gaga's and Michael Jackson's and Kurt Cobain's, who's probably a 4, wing 3. But it's like, oh, Taylor Swift. You get Taylor Swift. So this is another person in those category of people.
Yes.
And we're going to talk to her about what that's like.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah. I feel like ISFPs and 3s are kind of undertyped in the community. So I think a lot of ISFPs type as either INFP or INFJ. I almost never see ISFPs typing as ISFPs. And then I think a lot of 3s, for whatever reason, I just don't see in the Enneagram community. So I don't know if that means that there's just less of them there or that people aren't correctly typing themselves or whatever. But I feel like both of those types get underappreciated and 3s get appreciated for the things they do, but not for like the essence of their 3ness, if you will.
I think that when I took the Enneagram tests, the type that I had the most points in, it was like a dumb self-type yourself book for like children. And I got 8 was the top type. And I think it's just because the examples they gave in the book was like, oh, the 8 is like the boss that like gets shit done because they're very assertive. And I was like, oh, I could relate to that. But for some reason, the examples they gave for 3s, I couldn't relate with. But then when I learned about it, like the motivations behind it, I was like, yes, I very much want to be loved. And I think the way to get that is to be very impressive, successful. A lot of it has to do with just things that are difficult. And like a lot of 3s probably feel like they probably struggle with some sort of self-esteem thing where they think like they can't get love in other ways. Like they think that love is a conditional thing and a transactional thing rather than this like free-flowing thing.
Yeah.
And I think what I've really been learning in our relationship is that. And because what ends up happening if you're a 3 and that's what you believe in, a lot of times you might attract people that want that. And with us, I never felt that like that was something you wanted. Like a lot of times in our relationship, you kept saying like, oh, actually when you stop trying to like do all the things and all of the achievements and awards and stuff like that, and you're not trying to be impressive, is when I feel the closest to you.
Yeah. It's like, because here's the thing. It's like,
and this isn't meant to be a relationships video, but it's like I can't as a...
But it's like, yeah, I want to make a quick clarification, which is like, oh, I love that you're super motivated. That's one of my favorite things about you is like, you're so action-oriented and you like immediately take action on things that you feel passionate about, that you want to create. Like that is such a sexy trait. Like I love that about you. But when it gets in the way, when it's like, oh, you're trying to achieve instead of connect. Like there are times when it's like, oh, I feel like you're trying to like get me to clap for you instead of like genuinely have conversations and connections. And that's also like we're both assertive types, so that happens in different ways.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, maybe other 3s relate to this or I'm just like learning about this now, but like it feels very much like the 3 sounds very much like narcissism.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what's the difference between narcissism and being a 3? Because it's like, in my heart, I'm like, oh no, I don't want to be a narcissist. Like, and I don't think that my motivations are purely narcissistic, but I'm like, oh, if you read like the textbook, narcissism is like people thinking that they have to be like super impressive or like, maybe it's
like a need for constant validation.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like also delusional thinking and stuff with narcissistic personality disorder that like you don't see inherent to the 3 type. So it's very different, but it's like, I get what you're saying. It's like, I think the core difference there is like the 3 really does deep down want connection and belonging and closeness. Yeah. It's just like something in their brain thinks the way you go about getting that is by being impressive. Because probably like at some point you learned that.
Oh yeah. No, it's like, yeah, like growing up in a family that values achievements rather than who you are can really lead to a person who thinks that achievements is who they are.
I think there can also be this challenge of not learning the other skill. So it's like not learning that one can also be loved for like letting down one's guard and being seen and being understood for like their vulnerable parts. And that's something I think it's funny. This is now turning into the relationship video, but it's like that's probably the biggest challenge in our relationship is like both of our complete and total desire to feel close without being vulnerable with each other.
Yeah, that's a very big thing. Like, we're just learning it now, like 3 years into our relationship. We're learning that, like, oh, if you want to have real connection, you have to let go of all of the bullshit. And even if you do get love by being very impressive or by being a person who's very achievement and success oriented, there's going to be times in your life where you won't feel like being as goal oriented, and you won't have the same desires to wake up and constantly go and do, and you won't always be successful, because it's kind of like, even though you're a motivated person, you're going to go through ups and downs. And if you feel like your worthiness to be loved is attached to that graph of success, you're going to end up very unhappy. And I have been very unhappy a lot of the time with that feeling of like, I'm not successful in my work right now, so I don't have any value or worth in my relationship. The person I'm with is going to leave me, or I'm just going to end up crumbling down into a little ball of nothingness and want to like hide myself from the world. But it's really important to detach and say, well, if I do achieve love in that direction, when you receive the love, it isn't going to feel very good. And that's something that I always say it over and over again. Like, getting the things you want in an unhealthy way won't feel good when you get it. And it's something that if you're younger and you haven't really experienced that yet, you still think like, oh, but if I do try, I'll be able to sustain it and keep it and it will feel good. But it like ultimately it just feels like it's love, but it's really conditional, and I don't feel very safe in it. And I don't feel very like valued in it. And it's really important to like step away from those things so that your value is, and it's not just like that in romantic relationships. I think I'm just a very relationships oriented person.
You're an SX3.
Yes.
So like her instinctual variant that she favors is the sexual or one-to-one variant. So that also plays into why like a lot of the focus you do place is on like impressing a partner and like
and also as being an ISFP who has lots of feelings, it's like I put a lot of emphasis on that, where I'm like, oh, I want to feel these things, and the way to get to those experiences and feelings is through these achievements. And
can I segue into something else?
Of course.
That I feel like transitions nicely. What's interesting is when we were talking about making this video, I asked on Twitter what questions you had for an ISFP 3. And someone was saying, well, like, how does that work? Because the 3 is kind of feeling, they suppress their feelings, but the ISFP is feeling all the time. But what's notable here is that the 3 does not suppress all of their feelings. No type suppresses all of their feelings.
Oh, yeah.
That would be madness. The 3 only suppresses the expression of feelings that they think are going to be badly received by others. So they suppress kind of their vulnerabilities. But being an ISFP, what's really interesting, if you don't want me to share this, we can cut it out, but you got famous off of kind of sharing what looked like vulnerabilities.
Oh, yeah. It wasn't even my words. Like, when we started creating videos together, I very much liked the way that Heidi wrote, and I was like, wow, that sounds very beautiful. I think that with my skill set of creating videos plus those words, it will equate to this person that people will think is very like worthy and valuable and stuff like that. And it's like, I very much kind of attached to that. And it was like, it just wasn't me, because people would meet me and think that I was a person that like knew all of these things or that acted a certain way. But really inside, I like never really developed any sense of true critical thought about the world around me, because I was just looking for this like validation.
Here's what I kind of focus on with that. It's like some of your videos were your words, some of them were other people's words, like some of them were scripted, and like you can see on the videos which ones are scripted by me or someone else versus which ones you wrote. But even the ones that you wrote, I feel like they were very curated.
Oh, yeah.
Which is normal. Like, that's not a weird thing.
No, scripting videos isn't.
Everything is curated that people put on social media for the most part. But, like, where I think that kind of showed the intersection between the 3 and the ISFP is like, oh, your route to achieving success in the video world was to make these videos that looked very, very vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right? And that kind of came off as very like, oh,
heartfelt.
these are very heartfelt. And they were. You put your heart into them.
I did.
But it wasn't like you were sharing things that were your true vulnerabilities as a human being.
Yeah.
You know?
No, those were things that, they're like the sexy vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Like, oh,
that's a good term.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
the heartbreak, not being the one who loves more, all of the things that are vulnerabilities that also kind of make people empathize with you in a way that feels good. And it's like sometimes the real vulnerabilities are things that people might not understand, but are still really important to share.
Yeah.
Because the people that do
Yeah.
understand it will understand it on a very deep level.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm still in the process of figuring out how to take this skill set that I have, which I've developed over many, many years of like crafting and putting together videos that are very visual and beautiful, but actually putting my own spin on it that is truly vulnerable, which I think is kind of the life struggle and path of the three, is
Yeah.
figuring out how to do that. And it's hard. And you always say this, it's like, you shouldn't be embracing your Enneagram type.
Yeah.
You should be
Yeah.
using it as a tool to work on yourself.
Yeah.
And as an ISFP3, my path is through my artwork. That's the path in which I'm going to heal. And I think that with any Enneagram type, your kind of Myers-Briggs type is probably going to kind of be that path to heal. It's like, oh, if you are an 8 and you want to heal the parts of yourself that really want to be in control, kind of using your Enne to work through that and find
Absolutely.
solutions
Yeah.
is really healing. So it's
Yeah.
like, oh, that's how I think those things intersect. What's the struggle and the challenge you have, and what's the path to that healing? And I think that if you take the different parts of yourself that you come to understand over the years and through a lot of the type work that you've introduced me to, you can find those solutions and find those paths that feel meaningful and that feel like you're actually getting to the root of the problem and getting and finding the solution and constantly growing through that. And it's really hard work. And I feel like I'm only starting to do that right now.
Yeah. No, all of that is super well said. And it's like, oh, it raises a really interesting point, which is like, I feel like, because also being an ENFP 8, I get a lot of like, how do those things intersect? Like, how does that make sense? Because FI is so exploratory of feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And then the assertive types are all to an extent suppressing of vulnerabilities. But that's not the same thing as feeling. Nobody suppresses all of their feelings. That would be impossible. But it's like, if FI is looking at the entire range of emotions, that includes the emotions of like strength, of dominance, of passion, of power. Like these kind of assertive emotions are very much within that entire emotion spectrum that FI explores.
Yeah.
So it's not as at odds as people would think. But I think it's like, it's been interesting to see as an ISFP, because the 3 is also very wound up in like power and influence and wanting control, you know? And it's been interesting to see an ISFP navigate that, because it's like stereotypically, ISFPs kind of come across as like maybe more agreeable, more like withdrawn. But I think from the moment I met you, I was like, wow, this is a very assertive person. Like, especially in your work, like you just really take the reins and run with it, to the point where it's like, it can be intimidating for other people, even people who are like thinkers or whatever, because you're so decisive and you're so passionate and you see exactly what you want to see created, and then you want to make it happen. And it's like you have such a pointed vision between that FI, SE, and NI. And it's like, to me, it fits perfectly. Like the ISFP and the 3 actually fit very well. I think the only area where maybe it can feel challenging, and correct me if I'm wrong, not the only area, but like a main area, is like having the TE to pull it all together can feel annoying. Probably.
And it's especially since a lot of 3s that end up becoming successful are other types, because I do think that ISFPs generally struggle a little bit in certain areas of like keeping it all together. And in my career, I've met tons of 3s. Like anytime you're working a job in a field of putting yourself out there, creative videos, you're going to see lots of 3s. Even you have 3 in your stacking, right? It's like, it's just part of it. You have that need to want to be seen and connect. And I've met lots of 3s who are TE dominants who have met me and have really appreciated my talent, but always felt like they needed to criticize the way I approach it. So they would say things like, oh, you're very sloppy in the way that you work. You need to show up on time more. You need to be more consistent and diligent. I was still getting incredible results. They just really didn't like the fact that I didn't wake up at 5 a.m. every day and that I was, I took a long time to finish things and edit things but the results spoke for themselves. And I think for people who don't have TE higher up really struggle to see people with lower TE, just like I might see someone who only focuses on TE and doesn't value FI at all. But it's like, yeah, it's this weird thing, especially within the 3 world, I think, more than any other type of like Enneagram type and Myers-Briggs type combination. It's like the 3s who have TE really don't like to see other people, I think, that have achieved success in any way in a different way. And I don't know if that's true or not. It's just something I've really noticed because I've worked with a lot of them, and it's just always been this like
I feel like
struggle.
that can also be a TE thing in general sometimes, because TE is very like about finding the most efficient route.
Yeah.
And sometimes, not always, but there can be this kind of thing with TE where they figure, okay, I found the most efficient route for me, so this must be the most efficient route for everyone, not realizing that like for an ISFP, waking up at 5 a.m. every morning is not the most efficient route.
I also don't even care about efficiency. Like, I'm never trying to prioritize efficiency. I don't even think about efficiency. I just think about, oh, here's this thing I want to achieve. And sometimes I'm way more efficient because this thing I like to think of is like, oh, because I don't have TE, the rules of time don't apply to me. So I'll be like, I don't care if this video takes a week. I'm going to do it in 6 hours. Watch me. And a lot of the times I do.
Yeah.
And it's like a TE first person would be like, no, this takes this amount of time, this takes this amount of time, this takes this. The minimum amount of time that it will take us to complete this project is 3 weeks with 2 days of buffer time, which is the way exactly the way someone I worked with thought. And it always pissed me off. And I was always like, let's just get it done, get it out there and see what happens. It doesn't have to be perfect. And other times it takes me 3 months to complete a project that should have taken 1 day because I had too much FI problems in my life that overtook my work. But it's like, what's wonderful about having TE last is you don't care about efficiency.
Yeah. It's a very optimistic approach.
Yeah, well, it's optimistic. It has its optimistic sides, but it also has its really devastating sides. But it's finding a balance, I think. But it's like, I think that having TE last can be looked at as like a superpower for sure. But yeah, it's like if you're a 3, I'm really curious to hear your perspectives. I would love to hear what your Myers-Briggs type is and what your Enneagram type is and what challenges you find in the intersection of those 2 types and what are just the good parts about that. What is your path to healing? What does that look like for you?
I have a question for you. As an ISFP and a 3, what would you say is the hardest part about being someone who has a lot of feelings, but who also feels the need to only show the ones that you feel like are going to be seen as acceptable?
I think I deal with the consequences of that later. I think that like I'm always like, okay, it's okay. I can just suppress this part of myself because the 3 is such a big motivation for me, or it has been for so long, especially just because the circumstances of my life are very much so where like I really want to have this close relationship to people in my life who aren't very accepting of me and welcoming of me. And so sometimes my 3 gets way more prioritized than any part of my identity, to the point where like I'll go sometimes and I'll be like, oh, I've achieved all these things, but I'm incredibly unhappy. And a lot of it's because of that. And so I think that I deal with the consequences of suppressing my emotions after the fact without taking it into consideration while it's happening. But I'm just starting to be more conscious of that. And I think that it's probably like that for a lot of people. The motivation of your Enneagram type when it's not healthy is so, so strong. And I think that it's like I identify with being a 3 way more than any other. And that's not a good thing.
Even as someone with a 3 fix, I really resonate with that. The whole thing of the Enneagram is that it's the thing that keeps you away from your essence. That's literally why they coined the Enneagram. They coined all the types because, you know, back in the day when the Enneagram was being discovered, someone was like, oh, we get really fixated on things and they keep us from being who we truly are. So it's like the idea is to try to rid ourselves as much as possible of the unhealthy behaviors of our Enneagram type and step into our essence. And it's like, you know, if you're a 3, your route to growth really is stepping into that, like going to 6 and figuring out what's true regardless of, you know, what feels the most validating.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I forget about that. We didn't talk about that at all, but like your route to growth is also through being like, if you're stepping into 6 and using that energy, you're actually finding what's true and what's good. And we have seen also many times problematically where I've resorted to 9 in unhealthy times. And when you're an FI dom and you resort to 9 in an unhealthy way, you just become void of any responsibility. You very much create pity parties around yourself. You think that you're the victim in every situation. And there's been times where I think that that's been a major struggle for me. It's like I'm feeling bad already, and then I think like, oh, I'm the worst. And it's just this self-deprecating bad situation where you're not actually moving forward. You're kind of moving back. But it's like, yeah, you have to kind of bring yourself back to reality and see where you have control and where you are making the choices that are leading to where you are in life, because everything has cause and effect. Every single moment that we're living in is caused by something that happened before it. So sometimes I'm just like, okay, here's where I am. Not what happened, not when I was like a 5-year-old child and how that kind of affected the way I am now, which often is a tool that's used in like psychotherapy. But it's like, oh, what happened 5 minutes before this? And what happened an hour before that? And an hour before that? And what happened yesterday? And it's like when you can see the patterns and like what happened in every moment leading up to that one, you're like, oh shit, I've been spending every day for the past 30 days thinking these negative thoughts about myself, holding myself back in these areas, and it completely makes sense where I'm at. It's not because like the world is against me or people don't like me or I'm not successful enough. It's like, oh, I've been putting myself in this situation, and that's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, that's the Enneagram in a nutshell, man. Like just realizing, oh shit, all of these situations that feel really painful, I'm setting myself up for because I'm seeking out confirmation of this worldview that I think exists.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, the 3 will often go, okay, I'm only going to get love if I'm really impressive. So they'll become really impressive, and then everyone will love them for how impressive they are. And they're like, see, it was true. But it's like a whole other world of people are not impressive, and they are also getting love because they have a different root. So it's like, it always creates this kind of self-defeating cycle if you aren't aware of and conscious of and working on that patterning in yourself.
Yeah. And I actually think I'm going to make a video on that, on the like looking at the moment before.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Watch for that.
Yeah. Wow, this has been inspiring, Heidi. Thank you for having me on this. And yeah, I very much am thankful for you and for the work that you do, because Heidi just wants people to understand themselves better. And you very much
for the work you do.
Lead by example. Thank you.
Well, if you guys have questions for Sarah about being an ISFP or 3 or anything else, or my girlfriend, or just an overall awesome human being, you know where to leave them. Mm-hmm. Or you can get at her at ISFP Sarah.
And go to www.heidipriebe.com to look at Heidi's Soul Bootcamp for INFPs and ENFPs, which is hands down the best tool for understanding yourself through your type. But it's not only good for INFPs and ENFPs, in my opinion, because we created it together, and I've learned so much about myself. And I know that hopefully one day there will be one for each of the types. But for now, check those out. There was so much hard work that we put into those. It's just filled with great information and skits, and it's funny and it's heartfelt, and you will see Heidi like you've never seen her before.
And an Enneagram 3 was behind the scenes. You know, the quality's amazing.
It's great. Go check it out, and thank you.
Okay, bye guys.
Bye.